This video may help to explain the unfounded Anunnaki or space alien logic regarding Adam's rib and Eve. The two Adams. Unlocking the secret doctrine and Genesis. The biography of the entire human race. We are used to thinking of Genesis as a singular event. A garden, a snake, an apple, and a fall. But Blavatsky peels back the layers of Hebrew symbolism to reveal that this fall wasn't a moment of disobedience. It was a cosmic necessity. It was a process that took millions of years, spanning different dimensions of reality. To understand it, we have to look at the structure of the universe itself. Spiritual science teaches as above, so below. The drama of Adam and Eve happened twice. First, as a metaphysical event in the high spiritual realms, what you might call the Tila event, or the casting of the divine image. And second, as a physiological event right here on terrestrial Earth, in the muddy, volcanic landscape of the Lemurian root race epoch. The celestial separation, the Tselem. Let's begin with the first event, the separation in the upper worlds. In the Kabbalah, this is the realm of Adam Kadmon, the heavenly man. This is not a man of flesh and blood, but a vast, archetypal force. At this level, humanity was not male or female. We were a divine androgen, pure spirit, containing the potential for both polarities, united in perfect equilibrium. But for the universe to exist, unity must become duality. The one must become two. Blavatsky points us to the Hebrew word, tselem. In Genesis, it says God created man in his own image. That word, tselem, is the key. It means a shadow or a mold. This is the Tsela event of the spirit. A blueprint was cast down from the divine realms. In this higher event, the feminine aspect, the Shekinah, differentiated from the masculine pillar. It wasn't a physical split. It was an energetic polarization. The shadow of humanity was cast into the lower worlds, waiting to be filled with matter. This was the spiritual separation, the creation of the astral double, the ghost within the machine, before the machine was even built. Event 2. The terrestrial separation, the Lemurians. Now, we descend into matter, the physical realm. We move from the archetypal world to the physical world. Millions of years pass. We arrive at the time of the third root race, known as the Lemurians. Here, the as above begins to manifest so below. According to Blavatsky, ancient doctrines and spiritual science, the early Lemurians were not like us. They were gigantic, ethereal beings. They were physically hermaphroditic, meaning every individual possessed the biological organs of both sexes. They reproduced not by sexual union, but by a process Blavatsky compares to budding or sweating, releasing genetic material that grew into new forms. But as the Earth entered a denser phase of existence, the mid-Mesozoic period, the human form had to adapt. The single, androgynous mold could no longer hold the tension of the two polarities. This is where the Bible gives us the allegory of the rib. Blavatsky tells us to stop looking for a missing bone. The rib represents a portion of the etheric substance, the life force itself. Slowly, over generations, the androgynous form began to atrophy on one side and specialize on the other. Some forms retained the masculine aspect, others retained the feminine. The separation of the sexes was a slow biological divergence. The atom of dust was split to create the two halves of humanity, the coats of skin and the deep sleep. This leads us to the most essential part of the story, the coats of skin. Genesis 3:21 tells us that after the fall, God made for Adam and Eve coats of skin and clothed them. For centuries, people thought this meant animal furs or fig leaves. Spiritual science corrects this with a heavy hand. Blavatsky says, "We are wearing the coats of skin right now." As the sexes separated, the earth cooled and hardened. The human body, which was once gelatinous and semi-transparent, began to condense. The deep sleep that fell upon Adam was the slumber of the spiritual consciousness. As our bodies became dense flesh, the coat of skin, we lost our connection to the astral worlds. We became imprisoned in matter. The most significant casualty of this hardening was the third eye. Blavatsky explains that the early androgynous Lemurians had a functioning eye at the top of their heads, the eye of Dangma Sro Shiva. It looked into the spiritual realms, but as the coat of skin thickened, and as humanity began to reproduce sexually, the energy required for that spiritual vision was diverted downward into generation. The third eye retreated deep into the skull, atrophying into what we now call the pineal gland. We traded spiritual sight for physical sight. We traded the unity of the androgyny for the pleasure and pain of sexual duality. So, where does that leave us? Spiritual science demonstrates that the story of Adam and Eve is not a story of sin, but of involution. We had to fall. We had to descend from the airy, unthinking unity of the spirit into the heavy, isolated duality of the flesh. Why? To gain the self-consciousness. The innocent Adam Cadman knew he was divine, but he didn't understand it. By falling into the mud, by wearing the coats of skin, by suffering through the separation of male and female, we are slowly forging a mind, a manas, that can understand its own existence. We are currently at the bottom of the arc. We are the separated Adam and Eve, wandering in the wilderness of matter. But the secret doctrine promises that the process is circular. We are evolving back toward unity. The coats of skin will eventually thin out. The pineal gland is destined to reawaken, and the two halves of humanity will eventually reunite, not in the flesh, but in the spirit, returning to the source, fully awake. Think of a seed. Within a seed, everything that seed will become is encoded within. A grape seed becomes a grape plant. A pumpkin seed becomes a pumpkin plant. Think of the first human not as a man, but as a seed. a divine capsule containing the blueprints for both male and female. To create life, a seed must break open. The shell must crack. The taking of the rib was not surgery, it was fission. It was the cosmic moment where the single, unified seed of humanity divided its polarity. The one became two. The structural beam was split, creating two pillars of the temple where there was once only one. Adam didn't lose a part of himself. He was unfolded. The feminine was not an afterthought, made from a spare part. She was the other half of the divine architecture, revealed only when the seed finally opened. If the rib was the biological separation, the snake is the psychological awakening. Here is a narrative block for that section, keeping with your seed blueprint theme. Narrative block: the serpent, the awakening of mind. But the story doesn't end with the separation. The seed had split. The forms of man and woman walked the earth, encased in their thickening coats of skin, but they were incomplete. The ancient texts say they were mindless. They were like beautiful plants, alive, growing, reproducing, but asleep. The blueprint was physically complete, but the lights were not turned on. Enter the serpent. We have been taught to fear this creature, to see it as the enemy. But the secret doctrine flips the script. In the esoteric language, the serpent is the universal symbol of wisdom and the cycles of time. The temptation was not a trap. It was an invitation. The fruit of the tree of knowledge was not an apple. It was the spark of self-consciousness. You see, a seed growing in the dark eventually needs the sun. The serpent represents the solar angels, forces of higher intelligence that descended to tempt humanity into thinking for themselves. They whispered to the sleeping Adam and Eve, "You are not just animals. You are gods in the making." Eating the fruit was the moment the physical brain linked up with the spiritual mind. It was the moment we realized we were naked. It was the moment the seed realized it was a tree. Yes, it was a fall from the innocent, mindless bliss of the animal kingdom into the difficult, painful world of human choice. But without that bite, without that serpent, we would still be in the garden, safe, eternal, and completely unconscious.